Well, once again, you have reached the Books and Music Show. It's the Books and Music Review Show. And there you go, there's our disclaimer. The opinions and views expressed on this program do not reflect those of the management or staff of Staten Island Community Television. And of course, it's all copyrighted, and so welcome to Gerard, our researcher.
Hi, thanks for that very warm welcome. Today we'll be discussing a topic that's consumed a lot of ink and airtime and has gotten a lot of coverage in the press and, of course, throughout social media, and that's this subject of censorship on social media. Now, some people don't like to use that word censorship because they say you can only the only entity that can censor opinions is the government, the federal or the state government, when they exercise force to restrict someone from publishing something or saying something and have them arrested. One of the ways they do this is through something called prior restraint, and this has been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. It's essentially stopping someone from publishing an opinion before that opinion is made known, before that pamphlet or newspaper is published, or that person goes on the air and says something. So in other words, you're restricting someone's speech before you can determine whether or not it's illegal, whether it violates the law in terms of incitement to violence or is libel or slander. You're essentially stopping them from exercising their First Amendment rights, and the Supreme Court has said this is illegal. And when people, one of the things that people who are supportive of or indifferent to social media censorship, one of the things they say is that it's not really censorship because only the government can censor points of view and can legally censor you. And I think that's a very reductive way of looking at this issue, because if an entity like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of these large social media companies, especially a company like Google, which is for all intents and purposes a monopoly in terms of this field of social media and video streaming. They own YouTube, which is the dominant force in terms of video streaming and watching online videos. Once these companies are able to deplatform someone, they essentially disappear them from the public square. And I use the word censorship because there really isn't a better term to describe what's happening. It's people being restricted from accessing a platform and disseminating their opinion, exercising their speech because of their political opinions, their philosophical or political opinions cut against the grain or offend someone to the point where the owners of these sites feel it necessary to throttle them and stop them from disseminating their message. And I think people lose sight of the idea that free speech and freedom generally, it encompasses more than simply the constitutional protections. Yes, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey aren't physically coercing people or stopping them from exercising their right to free speech. It's not like during the First World War where Eugene V. Debs and other pacifists were threatened with imprisonment or actually imprisoned for speaking out against the war. There's no congressional law expelling these people from these sites, but it loses sight of the fact that freedom of speech is a much broader agenda than simply protecting defending codified protections in the Constitution. I mean, it means defending speech, even speech that you disagree with vehemently. It's reminiscent of that Voltaire quote. I can't quote verbatim, but something to the effect of, "I'll fight to the death to defend your speech, even if I disagree with it." And I think that's one of the most important aspects of the First Amendment, the idea that you can you defend speech that you disagree with, because speech that's universally popular doesn't need a rigorous, robust defense. And I think another topic, another aspect of this that's missed is that there is a very kind of incestuous relationship between the government and these social media giants. They're not antagonistic. If you looked at the Mark Zuckerberg hearings, and Jack Dorsey is going to be testifying in front of Congress about ostensible Russian interference in the U.S. election later this week or next week. If you look at the Zuckerberg hearings, it was essentially it was almost like a kind of like a Potemkin cross-examination. You had the members of Congress badgering Zuckerberg in order to enact their agenda, which was to restrict speech, and Zuckerberg basically acquiescing because he has no objection to that in theory or practice. And that was sandwiched in between hours of adulatory kind of these paeans to how great Facebook was and how they were a marvelous innovative force, despite all of the invasions of privacy and the disclosure of private information to corporations and all sorts of other nefarious things that Facebook was complicit in. So you have to understand that there's a very deep cooperation between these companies and government officials. One of the reasons that Alex Jones was censored, and I'm going to use that word, one of the reasons he was censored was because there were people like Tim Kaine, the former running mate of Hillary Clinton and the current senator from Virginia, demanding that he be censored, and Chris Murphy as well, the senator from Connecticut, repeatedly demanded that not only Alex Jones be censored, but that even seemingly less controversial non-leftist entities like Fox News be restricted. So the idea that this push to de-platform people and to censor people is going to end with controversial conspiracy theorists is simply not the case, and we're already seeing that borne out by these demands to increase censorship and to de-platform more people. It didn't end with Alex Jones. After Alex Jones was deplatformed from all of these social media entities. Gavin McInnes was banned from Twitter and groups affiliated. I'm sorry. And groups affiliated with Gavin McInnes were banned. And PragerU, which was an even less controversial website that buys ad time before videos on YouTube and on Facebook, even PragerU was temporarily banned from advertising because what they espouse is contrary to what the people that run Facebook and YouTube believe. And that's the danger of entrusting these people with this sort of power, because they're not independent, open source publishers, independent or open source entities where anyone can participate. They're publishers, but they're publishers with a set ideological philosophy. And even Jack Dorsey, in his interview with Lester Holt, admitted that they're left-leaning, even as he tried to make this unconvincing, unpersuasive argument that didn't have any effect on the decisions that were made in terms of content, which has already been debunked. James O'Keefe and Veritas conducted a sting operation a year or two ago, which exposed that, which captured Twitter employees on tape saying that they intentionally censored conservatives and pro-Trump voices on Twitter. So they were caught red-handed, and yet they still deny what's evident. Even Wired magazine, which is a very left-wing publication, published a piece, ironically a piece calling for greater censorship of conservative voices on these websites. They published a piece focusing on Twitter and Jack Dorsey's decision, and they admitted that Jack Dorsey personally handpicks people to ban and shadow ban from Twitter, something that he adamantly denies to this day. So the bottom line is you can't really trust any of these people to exercise independent, impartial judgment, because that's not what their intentions are. And you can see I think their bad faith is illustrated by the pretext they used to ban Alex Jones, which was that he had participated. He's known widely, but before the 2016 election, he was known very widely as a very prominent conspiracy theorist, and they used his conspiracy theories related to the Sandy Hook massacre as a pretext to ban him, even though these were videos that had been made several years ago with no apparent repercussions. They waited until after the election of President Trump and a few months before very crucial midterm elections in order to ban one of the biggest, most popular, and widely known pro-Trump conservative voices. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to draw a kind of elementary conclusion that there's a connection between Alex Jones's popularity and his involvement in domestic politics and his expulsion from most social media sites. And you can, if you really want to dig even deeper, you can look at all of the politicians that some of whom I've alluded to already, Tim Kaine and Chris Murphy, who've been badgering these people repeatedly to crack down on so-called bots and Russian bots and kind of people they accuse of trying to influence the election. So there's a direct link between these congressional demands and the new push among social media companies to expel conservative and pro-Trump voices. And in fact, that's essentially one of the things they use. One of the methods they use to ban these troublesome users is to label ordinary conservatives or pro-Trump accounts, or even not necessarily pro-Trump accounts, but accounts that are anti-war or that are antagonistic towards the dominant viewpoint pushed by the media, to label them Russian bots. And you see this repeatedly. They're labeled Russian bots because it's easier to ban them instead of rather than admitting that the actual reason for the banning, i.e., they have political viewpoints that are antithetical to the people who run Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. And I think this is a connection you almost never hear made in the media, which is woolly on the side of banning people. For example, I mean, you have CNN, which is repeatedly labeled as fake news by the president, accurately, because they've tried to dox individual Twitter account users. And you hear, not only on CNN, but almost every major media outlet crying for more censorship. What other country can you think of where the media, an ostensibly independent media, is demanding more censorship and the diminution of voices heard in the public square? It's baffling to someone who has no familiarity with how the mainstream media operates in this country. And I think that's a lingering bone of contention between the media and Trump. And one of the reasons the press despises the president so much is because he pointed out that they're not impartial actors, that they're advocates, and that they're partisans who are trying to manipulate the news to suit their own agenda. And I think they found an outlet to do that through social media and manipulating sites like Twitter and Google and YouTube in order to marginalize opinions that they deem heretical, that they don't think should be part of the public square and the public debate. And it's funny, there's a big debate about what should be done to combat this type of censorship. The president recently tweeted out support for conservatives and supporters of his who've been targeted on social media. And a lot of people are discussing what should be done. One interesting perspective is the idea that people should just stop using these websites. And there's already been a movement, even apart from this, to stop using sites like Facebook and Google and other websites that essentially serve as data mining centers for private information, excavating all of the private details of your life for profit for them and for other companies that are using Google essentially as a data mine. So, I mean, there's already there have already been movements focusing just on the privacy issues and the idea that these companies, regardless of their underlying political philosophy, are bad actors that don't need to be rewarded. And there are a lot of conservatives and Trump supporters now who believe that the best way to deal with this is to just completely withdraw from these companies and to deny them users. And to a certain extent, that's already happening since Twitter has gone on this banning spree. They've lost millions and millions of users, and their profits have declined slightly, even though that might be an episodic blip. But I think there will be a gradual withdrawal once people realize that their views are not welcome there and that they're being shadow banned, which is essentially being allowed to post but having no one see your posts. It's essentially being internally exiled within the website. So I think a lot of people are going to do that, but there's also been a movement to have government bureaucracies like the FCC try to regulate these companies and try to enforce provisions of, well, for example, there's one provision of the Telecommunications Act that gave these companies, these telecoms, immunity from lawsuits because they weren't going to be treated like newspapers or television stations, or they weren't going to be treated like television stations or radio stations in terms of liability. They wouldn't be sued for people posting things that could potentially be criminal. And there are some people who think that we should just remove those protections entirely and treat them like the partisan kind of publishers that they've already admitted in a lot of ways that they are. And there are other people who disagree with that, who say that entangling the government in any sort of in any way, or further entangling the government with these companies is just kind of giving them what they want, that it'll just be manipulated to their advantage. I don't know if there's a real solution on the horizon other than trying to expose what they're doing and to kind of peel back this facade of neutrality and this idea that they're working in the interests of their users. They're only working in the interests of their users to the extent that their user base are large mainstream media companies and journalists and very radical liberal activists who don't believe that people should be able to debate these issues, that there are certain opinions that should be quarantined from public view, and that you shouldn't be able to hold certain thoughts or express certain thoughts, at least not on the internet. So, I mean, those people they're definitely catering to those people, but I don't think they're catering to the average user who just wants to enjoy a normal internet experience and express themselves without fear that they're going to be blacklisted for expressing an incorrect opinion. The whole arbitrary nature of these bans, the idea that Alex Jones is going to be punished for outrageous or controversial opinions he expressed several years ago, when he's actually being punished for being an effective advocate for Donald Trump. I mean, that's the sort of thing that really needs to be exposed. And I do think a friend of mine mentioned the idea that this is a much longer term plan, that it's not simply about the 2018 elections or Donald Trump's reelection. And to a certain extent, I think that's true. There's always been a plan dating back, I mean, even before the fairness doctrine, to throttle speech. And it's in a sense, this is almost an age old debate. But I do think that there is an important element of this that's related directly to the upcoming elections, because these social media companies didn't realize that Donald Trump and his campaign could utilize them effectively and harness their power to collect like-minded individuals in order to succeed and achieve victory in the election. They were completely blindsided by this. They thought Hillary Clinton had it in the bag. And once Hillary Clinton lost, they were kind of baffled and perplexed and struggling to figure out how they could prevent this from happening again. And the conclusion they came to is that they needed to just throttle everyone who could be an effective or semi-effective voice in favor of the values espoused by people like Donald Trump and the political philosophy that was espoused by Donald Trump. But I think they kind of misjudged to the extent that you can't refight the last war, and I think that's something that they're trying to do right now. And I'm not sure it's going to be completely effective or as effective as they believe it will be. Well, it remains to be seen. It does seem that they're succeeding at stifling certain voices, although Alex Jones now is probably more popular than he was before, being globally censored by social media sites. But we'll see what happens in the future. In any case, I think we should all do a bit more investigation instead of just accepting the media's spin or the spin of Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg at face value, and really kind of cut through all of the transparent deceptions and lies about how they're working in the interests of their users, which is manifestly not the case. And I don't think the public in general is fooled by that any longer. The more they're exposed to these people and to their agenda. In any case, I just want you all to think about this, and hopefully we'll talk about this in the future. It's definitely not an issue that's going away, but I'm glad I was able to speak with you about this important issue for a little bit, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few things. We'll see you next week at 12:30 on Saturday.